Hi, everyone. We're very excited to present to you today's career webinar episode from the IIM Alumni Association. This is our 9th episode in the series, and the topic today is how to build a career in wholesale banking. So, what we're going to do today is do this over 5 segments. So, we'll start with introductions to our panelists. Then we'll go over their career journeys. After that, we will ask them some big questions, followed by a rapid fire round, and finally the audience Q&A. So that's the broad plan, but we will move along as it goes. And very excited to bring our panelists here today. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the panelists for our session today. The first panelist is Amit from the first batch of IIMK, 1999. Hi, Amit. Welcome. Welcome to the panel and thank you for being here. The next panelist is Shweta from the batch of 2001.
Hi.
Hi, Shweta. Thank you for being
Hi.
here. We would now
Thanks,
like to
it's a
welcome
pleasure.
Hi. We would now like to welcome Kalyan from the batch of 2002.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Kalyan. Thank you and good morning to you. We will now welcome Rajarshi from the batch of 2002 again.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Raj. Hi. And
Hi.
Nisha from the batch of 2008 and my batchmate.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Nice to
Nisha.
be on the panel.
Hi. Great. So thank you so much for being here again. And I think we'll start with a very quick question, from all of you. Why should someone consider a career in wholesale banking? And maybe we'll start with Amit.
Yeah. So everybody has his or her own reasons for choosing a career, and people can make money, succeed in any stream. But as far as I am concerned, I think the exciting part of being in wholesale banking is you get to interact with the top management of all a lot of corporations, big, small, big size companies. Quite early on, you interact with them and you learn a lot from them. So that's the advantage of being in wholesale banking, depending upon whichever product or stream you are handling. But that's something, an experience I think only consulting gives other than wholesale banking. So that's, I would say, one exciting part.
Great. Shweta, how about you? What do you think?
Well, I agree with Amit. It's a very exciting and growing space to be in. You get to learn about new industries, new corporates, various management styles, business models, and it's a constant growth journey.
Great. We'll move over to Kalyan. Kalyan, what do you think? Why should someone consider a career in wholesale banking?
Well, for me, I feel banking, particularly wholesale banking, offers a ringside view of how corporations, institutions, and governments actually function. So you get to see how businesses actually manage themselves and the impacts of those businesses and organizations on the global economy. So it's a fantastic sort of opportunity, a window into really understanding how the whole system works.
Right. Raj, what's your view?
Yeah, so for me, look, if India is going to become a 5 trillion economy, corporate India is going to drive that growth. And, whatever GDP growth takes us there, corporate India is going to grow at, a substantial part of that. And typically, wholesale banking will do 2x or 3x of GDP. So here's where the opportunity is, and therefore one should consider. And for those of you, who didn't quite, sort of relate to that answer, it's quite rewarding. So therefore, you should be part of, you should consider wholesale banking as part of your career choices.
Nisha, how about you?
Well, for me, wholesale banking is a great opportunity for people like me who get bored easily. So it's a place where you can work very closely with entrepreneurs and founders and help them build stuff. And the best part is you get to choose to work with multiple companies, multiple sizes. So you get like very good view into how business decisions are made on the businesses.
Awesome. Great. So with that, I think before we move on to career journeys, we'll take a minute and I will request Shweta to just explain what wholesale banking really is. So Shweta, how would you explain, wholesale banking to someone who's not familiar with it, right? What all does it encompass and what's coverage and what's the other roles? If you can just throw some light on that, please.
Sure. So in very simple terms, wholesale banking is basically banking services offered to large organizations, as opposed to retail banking, which is offered to individuals and small businesses. It has various functions, various roles within it. I'll broadly categorize them into credit, product, and coverage. Credit simply involves analyzing an organization's capacity to repay debt, basically assessing their credit worthiness. And then you have a whole suite of products which the bank offers to its clients. And the products could be as simple as cash management, helping a company manage their payments and collection cycle, trade financing, lending for financing their business needs, financial markets, and investment banking for the more strategic needs. So you could be in credit function if you don't want a client-facing role. You could be in product sales if you want to be a specialist in a particular product. And then lastly comes coverage, which is basically the relationship manager or the coverage banker who kind of weaves all these products and credit together to meet the customer's needs. So the role of a coverage banker is to understand what the client really needs and then bring in the appropriate product to meet those requirements. So that's in a summary, how I would define wholesale banking.
Fantastic. I think with that, we will move on to career journeys of our panelists. I will first invite Amit here, and the question is to the entire panel. So I'll just tell you what the question is. Basically, we're all very keen to hear about your career journey from B school to where you are today.
So for me, it's been long. I passed out of K in 1999, and I didn't get into the banking.
That one defining moment. I'm sorry. I was just saying that I would also like you to focus on that one big defining moment as you look back at your career.
Sure.
Go ahead, Amit. Sorry about that.
So as I was saying, it's been a long journey. I passed out. I'm part of the first batch at IIM. So I passed out in 1999. I had a very brief stint at RPG Enterprises, but I moved to CRISIL almost immediately. And I would say I learned, or my formative years in terms of my analytical and analysis capability were in CRISIL. I was there for considerable, almost 4 years. From there on, I moved to Reliance Infrastructure. Those were the time there were big projects planned there. And I would say I learned how to do business there, which was very different from more analytical focused work that I was doing in CRISIL. From there on, I moved to Yes Bank, which was my first banking kind of job. I was part of the investment banking team in Yes Bank from 2007, which was almost the beginning for Yes Bank, until I joined Capital India in 2017. Yes Bank, I handled investment banking for almost entire, I would say, bouquet of sectors. a lot of interesting stuff, and that's where I learned to do. Investment banking is, I'm sure, we had I think one session investment banking. It's like running your own business. It requires everything: marketing, selling, analysis, knowing all the industry sector. So it's quite exciting. It also kind of prepares you if you really want to set up your own business at some day. From there, I got an opportunity where to actually move to Capital India, where I run a wholesale lending business. It's a listed company, and it's been a very interesting last 3 year journey. Nothing like what I had done earlier. Here, I spend a lot of my time in not doing really analytical work or really any of those kind of work. I do spend a lot of time in stakeholder management or kind of people management. I think that's a much bigger share of my role that I handle here. In terms of what Shweta said, that the defining move, difficult to say because everywhere it's been different things that I learned. CRISIL, I said it was very analysis heavy kind of organization. So fundamentals of your analytical ability and all that gets honed. Reliance, I learned how to do business, and Yes Bank was a very enterprising place. I joined almost quite early on, thanks to another of my batchmate, Abhishek Bhagat, who was already there, and he brought me there. The kind of experience I gained all of these places have come good when I'm trying to run a business on my own in Capital India. So all of the actually 3 places had a great role to play in what I'm doing right now. In terms of defining movement, obviously it has to be moving to Capital India because this we have set up from scratch, literally from scratch, from conceptualizing the name, getting the brand name designed, and literally from everything. So that's been, I would say, the most exciting part.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll touch upon the entrepreneurship aspect a little later in the call as well. I'll move on to Shweta now. Shweta, you've had a very interesting journey of moving across 4 different banks, across roles over the last 2 decades. And I think in a way, I think it's a textbook journey of how a corporate banker should learn and pick up skills along the way. So if you could just talk a little about each move, why you made each move, and what you learned along the way, and how did it get you where you are today?
Sure. I started my banking career right from campus during placements. I joined BNP Paribas in their credit function as a credit analyst. And I spent my first 5 years in the risk role, analyzing corporates, doing the number crunching, and essentially I learned that credit analysis is much more beyond just looking at financial statements. It's a much wider approach. After spending 5 years there, I moved to Standard Chartered, where my role was a mix of credit analysis as well as coverage support, and I assisted senior bankers. This was a mix of credit and sales, and this is where I got the first taste of sales and pitching for deals, and that's when I realized that my interest lies in this field. I spent a few years in that role and then moved on to become a relationship manager, and then eventually led a team of bankers in Standard Chartered. So I think it was a great journey. I spent 11 years there, and after that I had a short stint at IndusInd Bank. And then in my current role in Societe Generale, I'm responsible for the North India business as the head of Delhi branch. I think if I look back, each of these roles has really helped me shape who I am in my career, because I picked up important skills in each one of these roles. But if I were to look at as a career accelerator, I think it was when I moved into a relationship management role, because that's something that I really enjoyed, and I think it just widened the opportunities for me.
Great. We'll move on to Raj now. Raj, you're a career Citi banker, and you've done so many different roles over the last nearly 2 decades, right? So if you can just take us through how you went about each move and how have you grown over the years in one organization, but yet done so much and grown as a professional.
Sure. No, so I must admit, back in campus, guys like Kalyan would intimidate me because I don't think I was cut out for the financial services space. And when you ran into a Kalyan, when they spoke to you, I used to struggle with my trial balances, and here these guys who used to just blow the I mean, they used to just kind of be mesmerizing. So frankly, starting out in a place like Citi was overwhelming. It began by a stint in operations, in wholesale banking operations, where I think I run the nuts and bolts of the business. I think in the first 6 months, I think what helped me the most is, I could recognize any piece of paper that came into the bank as to what is to be done with it. It may sound very menial, but that helps a lot, when you know what an LC looks like, what a guarantee looks like, what is a summons from the court, and, what is go to jail. I think it all helps. I think ops was the foundation. So I spent a couple of years in wholesale banking operations, post which I moved to markets in a mid-office kind of a role. And I think, that was, defining as well because it was a new business, new kind of environment. And from there on, I think I was pretty much focused on in sort of graduating to business. And I guess I got my first big break in Citi way back in 2005, 2006, when I moved to cash management product. And in those days, cash product wasn't digital; it was mostly paper based. So but it was still, I think there was so much opportunity to innovate. For example, how do you collect from every corner of the country? How do you issue payable at par checks in Tinsukia and Assam? Right, these things were just thrown at you as young MAs graduating into the business. And I think that's where you got your first taste of planning business 2 years hence. And I think cash product was a great sort of entry into business management in the wholesale banking side. Post which I did a stint in trade product before moving on to South India sales for the trade business. So I think in the first 4 to 5 years, I was able to kind of get a good feel of the cash trade and transaction banking business. And when you say an accelerator or a defining move, that kind of came after that, when the new CEO for Citi in 2010 decided he needed a head of strategy and someone from the business to assist him, to run Citi. And in 10, I got my first break to work with the CEO in the wholesale banking sort of unit, but with considerable oversight on retail. And that's really when aside of the unit, outside of the the banking area that I had exposure to, I think there was complete sort of understanding of how a bank works. Like how do we manage a balance sheet? How is the ALCO process work? What's the importance of compliance? How do you drive culture? What is the role of HR, for example? So I think it was a defining moment, post which I think the floodgates opened in terms of opportunities. I could decide, pick, and even frankly move into anything I wanted to, because you had the CEO to support you. So I did a couple of years in heading our retail SME business. That was exciting because it was a 150-member team, lots of clients. So we're just being thrown into the pool and learning how to survive. So I think it was great. Post which I kind of switched gears and moved to wholesale banking, where I have been for some time now. One thing that I've done since 2013, which has stayed all along the way, is something called as inclusive finance. For those of you who are familiar, 40% of balance sheet in India has to be to sectors marked as priority by the government. And for a bank with 35 branches, you can't do stuff like agri and retail lending beyond your reach. So I think it was a great sort of challenge thrown at me. And since 13, I've been running that business also for Citi, along with my wholesale banking career. So that's been my journey. Broadly, I would say to you is that I've survived in a single institution because I've done about 7 different roles. So that's about 3 years per role. It's like changing jobs. There are pros and cons. I would say that the specialists may have enjoyed a lot of vertical growth, because a lot of my batchmates who joined in, say, Atin is a batchmate of mine, and I have great regard from him. He's a GSEC trader. He hasn't done all these roles. but he's the GSEC trader that you would want to think of when you look at APAC as a region. I think he's one of the best that we've produced, right? So there are advantages of being focused. There are advantages of growing diverse. Maybe we'll cover that later in the chat, but broadly that's been my journey.
Sure, fantastic. Thank you. We move on to Kalyan, a very interesting, I think, off the beaten track journey. So I think just a few tidbits here. Kalyan, you worked with Indian Railways for 6 years before you joined IIMK, and from campus, your first job was TCS. So very intrigued to understand how you moved into banking, and also how you made all these big moves where you're now, of course, you moved jobs, organizations, countries, continents, and now you are the global treasurer of Cantor Fitzgerald. So very keen to hear from you about your journey and how you made the decision of moving every single time.
Sure. I definitely cannot say that I'm an example for how to plan a career, because a lot of my opportunities just happened to fall in my lap when it was right for the organization and for myself. So I just stumbled upon most of my roles. But having said that, I was always intrigued with the financial markets and how companies capitalize the businesses and how they would optimize their capital requirements and things of that nature. So I would read up quite a bit during the days when I was in school. And as the situation would have it, I think Raj would relate to this very well. When we graduated from IIMK, most of us had a choice between selling paint with one of the companies, or credit card with retail bank, or just basically take whatever got our way. So for me, that opportunity came from Tata, and I have a high regard for them. They're a great example of corporate governance and how to run a business in a very difficult sort of an environment, political environment. So when I went to Tata, I had an opportunity to assist some senior business development managers in life sciences and healthcare verticals. Did that for about 18 months. It was a fantastic experience, trying to understand how to sell to clients that are like large multinational pharma companies and the UK National Health Service. So that really gave me a perspective about sales. That was really my first opportunity to learn as to how to sell. However, my interest sort of continued to sort of remain in banking. And when an opportunity came up with Bank of America in 2003, I sort of quickly jumped at it. I came back from London and met with the folks in India, in Mumbai at the time. And, they spoke with me and they said, well, we like you. We think you have potential, but you have no experience in banking. And the only way to grow a career in banking is to start at the bottom. So I was given an opportunity to start as an analyst doing corporate banking credit for Asian clients. And they gave me about 30 seconds to make the decision. And I said yes. And I'm so glad I did that, because today, whatever progress I've been able to make professionally is all because of the first opportunity I got in banking with Bank of America in India. I spent the next few years in India supporting senior relationship managers and bankers out of Japan, Australia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, primarily doing credit, right? Analyzing companies, institutions, trying to understand, what's the risk of lending to these clients? How can we sort of optimize, in providing various product services, whether it's, FX or trade finance, cash management that Raj spoke to, or just providing working capital, facilities, or helping companies set manufacturing units and financing multi-year term loans. So it gave me a fantastic opportunity to learn various products in banking, and also how banking was done in various countries. Each of the countries in Asia is very, very different culturally, from a market structure perspective, from a regulatory standpoint. So really a great opportunity over the next 3 years. Make no mistake, I had to bend my back backwards over, because supporting multiple senior bankers in different countries across time zones, different cultures, very challenging, very rewarding. I did that for about 3 years. And then when it came time to have a conversation about career growth and development, one of the senior most managers in Asia basically called me up one morning and said, okay, listen, you have two opportunities here. You can either continue to be in India and do what you're doing, or you can pick up your bags and move if you want to grow. And that move could be anywhere on the other side of the planet. I just simply told him to sign me up. I didn't even know what it was. But then, of course, I got an opportunity to go to Bank of America's headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina at the end of 2005. I spent the next 3 years doing energy and power, utilities, natural gas, midstream pipelines across North America. Also primarily in credit role, but my responsibilities expanded to structuring, covering clients, looking at their financing needs and helping them, raise capital through either banking or capital markets channels. So primarily a credit and product role. And that was a fantastic opportunity to learn about a completely different market. While the clients were equally demanding and they wanted everything done yesterday, it was a very different market structure, different sort of regulatory regime, much bigger balance sheet that the bank had, with which we could basically offer our full suite of services. Unlike in India, where there were some limitations with the bank I worked with, that really opened up a lot of possibilities for me, and I learned a great deal. And when the 2008 financial crisis happened, fairly nerve-wracking, because within about a span of 3 months, the floor on which I worked, which had about 100 plus people, essentially only had like 9 or 10 people left. And it just happened that I was fortunate that I was one of those 10 people remaining. And that opened the doors for a lot of responsibility. And suddenly I found myself doing work that was done by 3 or 4 of my other colleagues who worked with me in the previous years. Very, very stressful, but I think it was the most rewarding phase of my career. It really sort of allowed me to grow into a much bigger role. And over the next couple of years, through the end of 2009, I was able to sort of handle that and learn quite a bit in the process. And post Lehman Brothers collapse, the banking system worldwide, I think, woke up to the fact that it's not enough to manage, a balance sheet focused on client financing needs. One has to manage their own liquidity needs as well. Nobody really managed liquidity risk, intentionally, so to speak. The way markets functioned, until the 2008 crisis was, end of the day, the treasury functions in each bank were instructed to make sure that they didn't leave any cash on hand. The target was to lend cash unsecured to various institutions so that your cash balance is zero, right? Otherwise, the traders weren't allowed to go home. So all of that changed after Lehman, because suddenly banks stopped lending to each other on an unsecured basis, and that basically slowed the whole economy and put the skids, so to speak, and the flow of credit stopped. Banks realized they had all these upcoming maturities and obligations for which they did not have cash, and if the money they lent to other banks didn't come back in time, they could fail. And suddenly there was a lot of focus on how to manage liquidity risk and funding risk better in the banking organizations. And when Bank of America and Merrill Lynch came together, the new treasurer back then, called me and said, "Hey, listen, we're now building a new function that focuses on managing the bank's own liquidity as opposed to focusing on clients. Would you be interested to come help us build that?" And anyway, my family was getting sick of my travels by then. I had a 18-month-old at home that really needed a lot of time and attention. So it was an easy decision for me. I cannot say, looking back, that it was 100% because of the focus on liquidity risk management that allowed me to take that role. It was a combination of my personal need at the time and the opportunity to learn something different. I switched, and the next 3 years, it was basically learning with my peers across the industry, because there were no liquidity rules back then. There was no Basel regime. There were no regulations around minimum liquidity requirements, or how to run a stress test, or how to build, a contingency plan if the bank were to get into trouble, and how do you not go under and survive through a period of stress. So all of that had to be put in place. I was learning along the way, not only with my colleagues in the organization, but also with my peers across the institutions. And it was fascinating. And that allowed us to also be at the forefront of funding and liquidity risk management, regulatory framework. We had a role in advocating for how the Basel framework was being put together at the time. That allowed me to really become one of the few people practicing that. And over the next 3 years, we built a strong organization infrastructure. I really got into the mechanics of how to build IT systems. Who would have thought a career in banking would also mean, chasing data across a large organization globally and multiple hundreds of systems all disparate, pulling them together and putting an engine on top, trying to do analytics and reporting across the balance sheet. Very fascinating, right? And then in 2012, I got a call from GE, which was one of the largest companies at the time, and also the largest client that Bank of America Merrill Lynch had. They suddenly were told by the Federal Reserve that they're going to be regulated going forward on their GE Capital business. They needed somebody to come build to the regulatory requirements. And I had the opportunity to do that at Bank of America. So I went and met them and took a role with them. That meant moving my family lock, stock, and barrel from North Carolina to Connecticut, which was a completely different experience for us personally. So spent the next few years building out, doing the same thing again for GE Capital until the company decided to sell the business. So I spent my last 12 months there really helping restructure the business, breaking down the balance sheet into pieces and selling those portfolios of assets and liabilities to other institutions in North America. That was a very fascinating experience. And then I basically worked myself out of a job there. And I had to find something else to do. And that's when I got a call from JP Morgan, because people that I worked with in my prior role, as I said, during industry interactions, they knew that I had certain skill sets. And I just jumped at it. I took the role. I worked with the global treasury for the next couple of years or so, focused primarily on managing global liquidity policy and regulatory management requirements, liquidity stress testing, ensuring that the various entities of JP Morgan globally had sufficient funding and liquidity at all times. That was a fairly challenging role. It's a fantastic platform. I learned a lot about the organization and then the global regulatory requirements around liquidity and funding. And then came a time when I really had to focus on my personal front and I had to take time off. So I took some time off and dealt with my personal needs at the time. And then when I was ready to get back to work, I got an opportunity with Cantor Fitzgerald. And like I said, things just came at the right time and I jumped at it. The one thing that is common to all these moves and roles was the willingness to put myself out of my comfort zone and, face a new challenge and do something new that I haven't been exposed to before and not feel overwhelmed. So I think that's the common thread. And here I am with Cantor, doing global treasury, among other things. It's fascinating. We have on one side a privately held limited partnership that focuses on capital markets and investment banking, managing the balance sheet and the funding needs and raising capital for that. And then there are a couple of other publicly listed companies as well. It's a different ballgame to run and the balance sheet and capital and deal with investors for public companies. So I'm really enjoying my role right now, and the journey continues.
Amazing. So off the beaten track as promised. We move on to Nisha now. So Nisha, we are batchmates and we of course joined HSBC together from campus. You've made a number of moves since then and you're now with Citi in London, focusing on the digital startups and the tech sector. Tell us how you went about these moves, and you earlier mentioned you get bored easily. So does it have anything to do with the fact that you made sure you got yourself a new role every few years?
Yeah, so yes, Shweta, I remember us starting the graduate program together in HSBC. And as you would appreciate, that was 2008. We had just settled in, and then the Lehman crisis happened and everything, all hell broke loose. I started in the commercial bank, and I have been in the commercial bank across banks all through. And in HSBC, that period, 2008, June, July, August, whenever the crisis happened, was when I was part of the mid-market space. I was an assistant RM, and suddenly everything broke loose, and we had all these credit losses. We had, I think at that time, we had one of the biggest frauds in India in the retail chain, and we had all of these derivatives getting knocked out. So it was a very, very interesting time to work on credit. And I sort of used that period, or I was forced to get into credit at that point, where I had to do the postmortem on a lot of these things and understood as to what went wrong and why, and what was how things sort of devolved over the years, even before the crisis happened, especially with the fraud I mentioned. So one of my biggest takeaways then was in learning how to think probabilistically, not deterministically, because especially in banking, like when you're, say, doing funding and acquisition, etc. Like you don't know exactly what scenario is going to play out. So it's very important at that point to sort of model what different paths could be like and make sure the bank is covered regardless of what event happens. So that way, HSBC was very good experience in credit. There was 3.5 years. And yes, so whilst I liked credit, I was not cut out to sit in a place all day. So at that point, I sort of took a step back from credit and I wanted to move into relationship management. It was around then that I started my second stint with HDFC in the corporate bank, where I was an RM. And the best part about working in an Indian bank like HDFC, and I would recommend this for everyone to do it at least for a short stint, is the amount of decentralized decision making, the amount of responsibility they give someone with 3 years of experience. It was mind blowing. I was independently running a 2,000 crore portfolio and negotiating deals with some of the largest corporates in South India. And it just felt like I had too much power, and it was very good learning because then you learn to use that responsibly as well. But my biggest career acceleration point was when I moved to Citi. And the best part about working in Citi was I found like the right fit for me. And I've been interestingly finding more and more interesting things to do, more and more challenging and fun things to do. So when I started at Citi, I was in Chennai and I was the relationship manager / I started as a business development manager, where I was just getting a new business in the commercial bank, companies like between like 100 to 1 billion in size, not many of them in Chennai. So it was very good learning experience. It was challenging as well. And from there, I was always interested in the tech space, and I always felt like I was missing out on what was happening in the whole tech ecosystem. So when a role came up in London for covering digital startups in Western Europe, I jumped at it and I got the role. And now I'm having a lot of fun. Essentially, what I do is I work with founders in the startup ecosystem across companies in Western Europe, and we sort of help them grow and scale. So you cover like 10 countries plus, and you work with the local accelerators, the local startup ecosystem, and also internally you work very closely with Citi's got a venture capital arm. You work with them, you work with the investment bank, you work with cash management and other products. You don't do much financing, but you do try and do a bit of it here and there. So it's a lot of fun in terms of helping these companies grow and scale and try and find the next unicorn so we can partner with them and we can grow with them. So that's been my story so far.
Amazing. I think it's so good to hear from all of you. And I think just a couple of themes before we move to the next segment. One, I think most of us, including myself, we've done that one role where where you assist a relationship manager, where you look at credit, customer service, and anything and everything that the customer needs, but more while supporting a senior banker. And I cannot emphasize this enough. I think that is one of the best roles that you can do in the first few years of your career in wholesale banking. There is no other role where you can learn as much. Of course, it's a lot of work. So for all of you who are there right now, hang in there and use the opportunity to learn as much as you can, get all the exposure you can, because this is a safe role where you can do that before you move on to being a banker yourself or product sales or any path that you choose, where you will have your own accountability, and yes, that is rewarding and challenging, but the learning that you can get right now is, I think, phenomenal. Just a last thought before we move on to the big questions. I was just reminded of a quote from Abraham Lincoln, which said, whatever you are, be a good one. So I think somewhere, everyone has spoken about that mindset or that desire to be the best in whatever role they've done. And it's very inspiring to hear all these stories. With this, we'll move on to our second segment, which is the big questions. And I think I will start with Raj. So we really start from where the journey begins, right? Which is placements from B schools into banks. And Raj, you've had that experience, right? So what is it that you look for when you're hiring from campus, and how should students kind of prepare themselves or set themselves up for a successful career in wholesale banking?
Sure. So look, I have had the privilege of going back to campus for hiring in my 19-year-old career journey in Citi at least about 10 times, I would say, if not more. So, I've gone back every year. And I must say, in addition to the campus sort of being fascinating, I think so has been the quality of students. So I think that's by virtue of being where you are at IMK, I think you pretty much make the cut. I don't think there's much to say around that in terms of what basic skill sets one would sort of require. But I guess a lot of banks like Citi would rely heavily on the entry level talent, and there's a very large focus on hiring diverse people. And when I say diverse, it's not only gender diversity. I mean, there can be diversity of all sorts, including just what's your background, and how you sort of delve into I think this century. I think there's been a lot of focus on reverse mentoring at Citi, where it is this generation that teaches the earlier ones in terms of how to adapt and survive in this environment. And I think our retail bank is a perfect example of where this is adopted quite well. But I guess the wholesale bank is not a laggard in any way. So just when we go back to campus, I guess all students and everyone makes the cut just by virtue of being who you are. But I think just to kind of be a little more specific, Citi normally relies on entry level talent for campus hiring. So if you're heavy on experience, typically that would be treated as lateral hiring. I would say that there is a fair amount of focus on making sure that the experience is about 2 years or lesser and not more. So in that sense, even if it's not relevant, that's fine. But I guess one would, if someone's been in a bank for 5 years and is applying to Citi, that wouldn't be relevant experience for most of us, because that's a lateral hire for us, and we would rely on hiring entry level talent. So just in terms of maybe rather than focusing on skill sets, let's just paint the first few years for you at Citi, and then maybe kind of decide whether you would like that or not. When I joined in 2001 as a summer associate, and then finally into the permanent sort of MA role in 2002, we were all asked to start in operations. Things have evolved. I guess campuses have a larger say with the banks in terms of what students like to do. I guess years of feedback have refined the MA role, and today I think what you get in Citi is an anchor department where you typically tend to get hired. But having said that, you would pretty much move around in 3 or 4 different areas, different products, different units, and different functions, so that your experiences are sort of well-rounded. But having said which, the hiring unit is the one which does the best assessment of your skills. So to name a few, I think ability to sort of think out of the box is something there's a lot of emphasis on, because increasingly in wholesale banking business, one feels that the ability to differentiate has always been challenging. So someone who could be able to drive and sort of build on independence, build on opportunities in a way that drives innovation. I think that is something which is extremely focused. There are several tests and techniques by which one does that.
All right. I think with that, we'll try and move to Kalyan and Nisha. I have a question around moving abroad. You know, how does one explore overseas opportunities? How does someone who's in banking in India, who wants to work overseas, get an international, be there on an international scale, get that exposure? What are really the first steps, and what has your experience been, and do you think your experience in India also kind of helped you and set you up for that success at an international level? So Kalyan, maybe if you could go first.
Sure. Well, obviously, things have evolved quite a bit since the time I had my first opportunity to move overseas with Bank of America at the time. Today, I believe there's a lot more sort of structured, deliberate, process around identifying talent that's ready to take on an international role, whether it's a 2 to 3 year stint or a more longer term opportunity. And once you sort of put up your hand and you perform and you qualify, you meet the criteria, and then you're in the talent pool. And then when the right opportunity arises, I guess you get structured into that. Back during the time I was with Bank of America in India, I think I was a test case in many ways. There's no such thing as a program to which you could move overseas. Like I said, the 3 years I spent in India doing the role that I was given at the time, it just so happened that a lot of times on Friday nights and Saturdays, when nobody in my department wanted to be hanging around running queries on 1970s database, doing some risk reporting for the region or for some senior execs in North America. People wanted to get out, catch dinner, and catch a movie or something. I was the one who was volunteered into running those queries because I just happened to be the guy who was okay doing it. And what that allowed me is to really sort of get into what's going on with the bank, across the regions and also in North America. And it allowed me an opportunity to build a communication process with people in North America, right? And then very soon that turned into, don't just send us the reports, tell us what's going on. So I had to learn about the business, the markets and everything. And very soon it became a regular interaction with those people, so much so that within about 3 months, I was invited to some of the forums, risk forums in North America, and people knew who I was. And suddenly I became the guy talking about all the data and the trends in credit and balance sheet and various industry sectors. So that really opened up the doors. People realized that I existed. So otherwise, if you think about folks in North America, right? So on the other side of the planet, here's some junior guy sitting in New Delhi doing his thing. So if you do your job very well, the best you get is you keep your job. Okay. People need to know you exist. People need to know that you do things that matter. So people need to know that you're good. So your work needs to speak for you. So it's a brand that you're building personally. So unintentionally, with time, I sort of found myself on a path where I had a lot more connections and visibility within the broader organization. And I was getting a lot more questions directly from senior people, risk executives and relationship bankers alike, that I was in that sort of, go-between, position with the platform in Asia on one side and North America on the other. That when it came time, when people thought about how do we help this guy grow from here, it was a pull rather than a push. That really helped. So my advice would be, look, if there's a program that allows you to participate in opportunities that come your way, absolutely do it. But otherwise, put yourself out there. Find meaningful ways to build interactions, communications, so that you create a visibility, a brand for yourself, right? And that has to come through what you deliver on the work front. And it takes time. It's going to take time. You got to be patient.
Lovely. So,
Yeah.
Nisha, what's your experience been like?
Yeah, so if I can just put my role in context in terms of how I moved, because I moved internally within Citi and about 2.5 years, just about 2 years ago. I would echo what Kalyan is saying. First, it's really important to build a solid credibility for yourself in terms of what you do, where you are. And for me, that was super, I think it played an important role. The second is, yes, you do need to build your network. Warm introductions always help, but they're not necessary. And I did not have any introduction in my scenario as well. The third important factor that I think is very important is when you're applying for a new role, regardless of where it is, I think it's very, very important to focus on what you bring to the table, because that's part of the role, and what you don't have that you need to work on, and be very transparent about the gaps. And be very clear with the hiring manager when you have a chance to speak to them that these are the things that I'm good at. These are the things I see that are needed in the role that I don't think I yet have the capability, but here's my plan of how I'm going to work on it. And for me, frankly, that was a big challenge because I have been covering one market for the last 10 years when I applied. And the role that I applied for was literally covering 10 markets. And so I joke with my boss about this now, that swapped me around from doing 10 markets in 1 year, which happened. And it was a big jump in terms of his decision making. But I think it helped that I did have credibility with what I was already doing in Citi India, which was building new businesses for the bank and the commercial bank, and which is what I would be expected to do, regardless of which market it was, in Western Europe as well. And second, it was, people think you need to pull a lot of strings when you move internally. Not so. It depends on the organization, yes, but it's very possible to just go through the channel of just finding a job posting, applying for it, reaching out to the hiring manager, having a conversation, and it sometimes works, and it worked for me. That was it.
Awesome. With this, we'll move on to Amit. I think it's time we heard about his entrepreneurial journey of, leaving a well-established bank to actually start building something from scratch. A lot of people dream of doing that one day. So how did you go about it, and what would be your advice to people who would like to set up a business of their own and leave, a comfortable job at a well-established organization?
So there's no method to it. I didn't intentionally plan for it that after doing this many years of service, I'll get into something on my own. One can't really plan some of these things, but one has to be very receptive to opportunities which come your way, and that's how it happened with me. An opportunity came, and I didn't let it go. The important part is, again, I think most of the panelists have emphasized, whatever we are doing, wherever we are, we have to try and do our best and see to it that we are prepared when opportunity comes. That's I would say there's no real method to it. But what is important is, and what career in wholesale banking does is, it makes you familiar with the way businesses are run. You interact a lot with the senior management, CEOs, promoters of the companies, and you look at various businesses, and that kind of enhances your understanding of various sectors, various businesses, how businesses are run in different parts. That kind of prepares you for doing something of your own. So if you see a lot of people, bankers who are really moving into these kind of enterprising ventures, a lot of them have been in wholesale banking. There have been a lot of investment bankers, because I think the advantage with being in wholesale banking also is you understand how to raise money, which is a very critical part of setting up any enterprise, because capital is a very essential ingredient, particularly in financial services. So that also plays a big role, and that's how it actually came about.
Great. So while we're talking about your journey, Amit, could you also highlight a few qualities that you think make you, a good CEO? I mean, you are the CEO of the firm, right? And what are those qualities that you think people should try to imbibe or gain over time, over the course of their career, if they are to be a good CEO of their own firm one day?
So I don't know whether I'm a good CEO or not. I am a CEO, that much I know for sure. So see, if you get an opportunity to run a business, definitely you have the qualifications and basic skills that are required, right? Otherwise, you will not easily get an opportunity to run a business. So that goes without saying that all the basics should be there. But as a CEO, the work you do or the role you perform is very different from compared to whatever else you're doing. Like if you're part of wholesale banking, if you're part of investment banking, either you're a relationship manager or you're a product manager or you're in operations or treasury, there are very specific responsibilities or roles you're performing. But once you get to a role where you're leading the organization or leading a business, the work that you do requires a very different set of skills, very different responsibilities. So, for example, a lot of my time goes into what typically we refer to as stakeholder management. So we are a listed company. We have a board meeting every quarter. We have to announce results to the stock exchanges. We have independent directors in the board. So managing that is a very important part of the responsibility of the CEO. That you have to manage the board, you have to manage external investors, you have to manage the promoter who is the largest shareholder of the company. So a lot of stakeholder management consumes a big part of, I would say, my time. Every quarter we have to get the accounts audited, and Deloitte is our auditor. So obviously they do. They are very fussy these days after whatever has happened with them. So that takes up a lot of responsibility. The other part is, and particularly for financial services firm, is regulatory management. We are a very regulated industry, whether you are in banking, NBFC, or any part of the financial services you handle. So understanding the regulation, managing the regulators. So that's again a part which regulator will keep coming with some queries or something or the other, but that's kind of again one very important aspect. Third important aspect, and I rate that as the most important, is building a team and keeping them enthused. That takes away your headache of actually running the business. Once you have a team in place, which is a good team, and that is what I would say first full 1 year we focused on when we set it up, of building a good team. Because once you have a team and they are fully kind of aligned with your vision, what you want to do, and they understand what you need, running the business becomes much easier. You have then plenty of time and liberty to look at other stakeholders. The other part of the, I would say, important part is, because it's a financial services business, capital is the raw material. So raising capital becomes extremely important and critical. And that again, in investment banking, I obviously learned that skill quite a lot. That is where experience of wholesale banking, investment banking plays a major role. So when we were setting it up, we actually started in December 2017 formally, but we had gone about doing presentation to potential investors in April, May 2017, and we were doing that. So there's a lot of skill, effort, and required in really raising capital, and it's a continuous process. So at a, I would say, CEO level, these things become far more important than really knowing your credit, knowing your product. Those you are supposed to know. Those are like prerequisites, but that's not really you are doing on a day-to-day basis. So that's I would say is roughly what are the kind of responsibilities and skills one needs.
Very interesting. And it just gets tougher and tougher, doesn't it? So let me now move on to Raj. I think we touched upon moving roles, right? Moving across roles earlier. So Raj, just want to understand a little bit more about that, right? So, I mean, within wholesale banking, of course, there are various segments. We spoke about some of those earlier. There are coverage roles, there's product sales, and like you said, right, you could either develop your own niche or try to do a variety of roles to be a more well-rounded wholesale banker. I'm sure, I mean, not everything works for everyone, right? So how does one find the right fit? How does one go about choosing, among those roles and building either their own niche or trying to do a variety of roles and being a more whole, some well-rounded banker?
Sure, Shweta. So, the way I would look at it is when you look at the spectrum of opportunity in wholesale banking, I think fundamentally, if you look at any corporate and their needs and what they kind of ask banks to kind of support is the obvious, which is they have payables management, they have receivables management, and depending on how efficiently a bank is able to manage that, it has direct impact on working capital. So working capital, and form of borrowing, ability to lend, and the credit skills are, therefore substantially important. A lot of the panelists spoke about it. But I think understanding credit is not about being able to analyze numbers. It's also about understanding business, getting a pulse of who the promoters are, and frankly, it needs to also encompass important things like in addition to ability to pay or repay, the intent. Right? So therefore, credit is a difficult aspect. Based on working capital, you could have investables, or you could have surpluses which need to be addressed. And then I think the most important part is corporate India today has internationalized their revenues, right? So when you're a wholesale banker, you need to talk to what drives growth in these companies. For example, is the bank or the institution able to support growth in Africa, Latin America, rest of the world? I think the emerging trade corridors are areas that Indian corporates are going to, and therefore heavily dependent on banks in India being able to service those corridors. And then lastly, being able to access capital markets, be it in the form of debt or equity. I think the role of the banker is therefore to give efficient access to capital and constantly create new opportunities for capital raise. Diversification of your sources of debt is extremely important. And therefore, I think it coming back to your question, a wholesale banking career would allow you to be a specialist in any one of these areas, or it would allow you to be a coverage person or a credit person and look at the overall picture, and drive this for your clients. So I think both are interesting, and both are extremely rewarding. I would carve out markets as a special niche for this. Careers in markets typically end up in markets itself, because it's a very broad area within markets. It's about risk management. It's about maintaining profitability. So mostly, I think careers do tend to be of both types, where one is well-rounded with equal amount of opportunity spent in each unit, and then becoming a coverage banker eventually. Or you could have careers with originate in credit. We heard Shweta, and I think that's a great example of a wholesale banking career can take off. And then you have the specialists, right? You have the guys who've been in markets for all their careers. Those are extremely rewarding too. So there is no right or wrong answer. It is a mixture of opportunity and interest. One needs to play along their own strengths and realize which way it takes along. So I don't know if I've answered it well. For me, it has been more about doing more things, different things, just to make sure that I'm motivated to not have the feeling of survived in Citi for so long, and do new roles.
You've answered it honestly for sure, Raj. I completely agree with you. And I think a few years into banking, most of us do find, one of the two being more suited to us. And that's how we develop our careers. With this, we will actually move on to the topic of gender diversity in banking. My first question here is to Shweta. In fact, in banking, in India especially, right, we've seen so many women CEOs running banks successfully. We have seen so many women in other leadership positions as well. What do you think works? This is, I think it's actually different from so many other industries, right? So what do you think works? I mean, why is this so?
Yeah. So I think to be a good banker, apart from having strong knowledge of your product, of your clients, you need a lot of soft skills in terms of relationship building, stakeholder management, your emotional quotient, really connecting to people, and also the ability to remain calm under pressure. I think all these qualities come quite naturally to women, and probably that's one of the reasons why women succeed in banking. And a lot of women may feel that it's a very demanding career, and they may not, with family responsibilities, that it can be difficult. But I mean, in my experience, I think it's something that you can balance quite well. I've raised two children without taking a career break, and I think it worked quite well for me. With the support of your family, your colleagues, you can balance out everything.
Great. I also have a question for Nisha. So Nisha, my question is around women applying for positions, right? So I think in banking, just like any other industry, we have women not applying for positions unless they think they have a very solid chance of being selected, or unless they tick all the boxes. What's your experience been like, and what would be your advice to other women in wholesale banking with regards to applying for positions that they are interested in?
Yeah, I would think that women tend to, in me including, tend to hold ourselves back from good opportunities because we think it could be too challenging, we'd have familial responsibilities, or it could just be too much to handle. My one suggestion there, and this is something I learned from experience, is as long as you build a support system and you just keep the faith that you will figure it out as we go along, I would suggest just jump in with both feet. It would be challenging at times, but you'd figure it out. You need to have the faith and confidence in yourself that it would be difficult going at a lot of times, but it would still be good. You will still manage it. And I can share a personal story. So when I got my job in Citi, I was actually 8 months pregnant and I was due to have my baby in 2 months. The funny thing was all my colleagues in HDFC, and HDFC is a good hiring ground for Citi bankers laterally. And so they were getting interview calls from the consultants. I was not even in the shortlist because I was pretty big and I was 8 months pregnant, as I said. But I was pretty pissed off about it. So I reached out to the hiring manager. Like I knew my friends were meeting, and I reached out to him and said, "Listen, I'm interested in the role. Do you have a slot to interview me?" And he said, "I'm having lunch in 20 minutes, and I need to go to the airport. If you can come now, you come." And frankly, and honestly, it was Chennai, so everything was like 10 minutes away. So I just literally dropped stuff on my desk and I walked out. And I went to meet him, and he was having his lunch, and he interviewed me over his lunch, and I had no prep, nothing whatsoever. But the best part was, the guy was such a gentleman. He didn't ask me once, like, your situation, like, how are you going to join this role in like 3 months? So at the end of the interview, I said, okay, because you didn't address the elephant in the room figuratively, I will. And I said, whoever you hire would probably join in 3 months, and I can promise that I would do the same. And then he took me at face value and he gave me a shot. And thankfully, my subsequent rounds were phone interviews, and I didn't have to face this. But I got the job. And then I had the support system. So I had a 1.5-year-old and a 3-month-old, and it somehow worked out. It was difficult at times, but I had a sales role, so I had a bit of travel as well. And I joined after a 3-month maternity break. So it all worked out. But at that point, if I had thought, like, is this even possible? I would have said probably not, but I didn't ask those questions, and I just got in and it just worked out. So I would suggest that women keep the faith. It will work out. Just do whatever you want to do.
Quite an amazing story out there. I think a very, very good, heartwarming example of not holding yourself back. With this, actually, we will move to a section on learning, right? Learning, further skilling, upskilling. Now, a few years into banking, right? What is it that we need to build on as skills, right? Is it a CFA? Is it a certification? What is it that someone can do to not just stay relevant, but also be fully updated on what's happening in the banking world? My question would be to Amit first, who very interestingly went back to college and got himself a law degree in 2017. So what motivated you to do that, Amit, and how do you think it helps you in your role?
So nobody believes that I did law just because I was interested in law. And even my classmates in my law college, which happened to be government law college in Mumbai, they were always very curious why this guy, because most of them were quite younger compared to me, is doing law because he's doing a good job. Probably he's earning decent money. What he will do with law. And really speaking, it was because of the interest I had in law. I thought, let me take this opportunity to do it formally. I have been interested in law for a long period of time. In fact, I was part of the team which drafted electricity acts for the state of Gujarat and Kerala way back in 2001 as part of the consulting teams from CRISIL. And in investment banking, also, you interact with lawyers, you negotiate agreements continuously. You need to know a lot of law. So I did get an opportunity. Fortunately, they admitted me because my CGPA in my engineering was decent. So that's how it happened. But coming back to how it helps, that's a very interesting part. All of us, especially at the senior level, are supposed to know law and supposed to know regulations. So there are n number of regulation, huge number of laws. Running a business, you're supposed to follow every law, every regulation. I'm running a listed company again. Then there are additional regulations and laws related to a listed company. So law is becoming important part, and the way we are going, we as a country, our legal system is following more of US, which is a very litigious system. Unlike Europe or UK, actually our legal system originally was based on UK, but we somehow moving towards the US system where people can file cases in the court, a lot of frivolous cases or any kinds of cases. Banks face a lot of legal cases, FIRs keep getting filed against them. Anybody can file a FIR, right? And police will take this opportunity to just poke their nose in things. So knowledge of laws, regulation is extremely important at the senior level. And that is perhaps the reason that a lot of CEOs in US corporations are lawyers these days. And I won't be surprised that we have lawyers as CEOs in India also after some point of time. But for the students and other people in the wholesale banking, knowledge of law is certainly very important, especially regulations. I'm sure most of you would know the regulation that applies to the products that you are handling. But general knowledge of law certainly is a great help, especially when you get to the senior level role where you are handling a lot of other stuff. Coming to the upskilling part, I would say that wholesale banking is that way a very challenging area, because the people you are dealing with, they are all very updated, educated. You can't take them for granted that they won't know what's happening in the market, what's happening in the regulatory world. Any new regulation RBI passes or RBI comes with or government comes with, you are supposed to know all of that. So keeping oneself abreast with what's happening in the regulatory world, in the economic world, or all around you is extremely, extremely important. So you may not go for a formal education or for upskilling or formal course, but it's very important to keep yourself updated, absolutely up to date on what's happening around you.
Great advice out there for all of us. I will also ask the same question to Kalyan. So Kalyan, you of course have a law degree, I believe, but in terms of upskilling and further skilling, I think what I hear is that you believe in doing whatever you're doing really well, right? I mean, you've always believed in becoming a subject matter expert at your role. How much do you think external certifications have helped you here, or how do you think one should go about that, in addition to just doing your own study, research, and preparing yourself well?
I guess it depends on the particular focus area that you want to sort of spend your time with, right? Like there are certain areas like credit research or equity research and portfolio management, other roles which specifically call for formal certifications such as the CFA or the FRM or other programs out there. Those are definitely minimally necessary criteria one has to meet, right? But then there are a lot of other roles within banking where you may not necessarily need a formal certification. However, to a lot of comments made previously by others, banking is a very dynamic, continually evolving sector, irrespective of which markets or which countries you cover. So to stay abreast of what's going on and to stay ahead of everything that's evolving is extremely important. So reading up on whether it's policy changes or industry level sort of evolution of various structures and products and how the markets are changing, staying ahead of that is really necessary. Banking is an area where if you take a year off and come back, you'll probably be behind by about 4 or 5 years in terms of what's going on. So it's extremely valuable to read up, whether it's literature in-house within the organization's policies or product structures, or it's just industry regulation that's evolving. Sort of go back to the question around does something like having a legal bent of mind. I don't necessarily say you would need a formal degree in law to be successful in banking. Mm-hmm. It certainly helps to think about it, right? Just take one step back. It all begins with the charismatic bankers like Raj and Shweta shaking hands with a client and agreeing to do something for them. But then the real work begins after that, right? It's all in the contract that you execute with the client, that you get into the guts of how you execute a service or offer a product and how you get paid back. And when you don't agree on what you actually shook hands on years ago, how do you litigate that? And how do you litigate that successfully and make sure you get paid back, right? So it's all in the contract, and words matter. Adding one word or taking one word out of a particular paragraph or a provision will make all the difference in the court when you have to litigate it several years ago, when nobody who initially shook the hands were in those roles, right? So it is important to understand what you're agreeing to and to put it in writing, to be able to read and understand how the structure you had in mind translates itself into, in some cases, hundreds of pages of a contract. It definitely helps to be able to have that bent of mind. And yeah, if one has the aptitude to get formal qualification, absolutely, it's always good.
Great. So, Kalyan, in fact, my next question is also for you, which is on exiting wholesale banking, So a lot of students that we spoke to earlier were interested in understanding what is it that they can transition to after a few years in wholesale banking. For example, could they move to investment banking? Could they move to fintech startups? I'm sure there are lots of opportunities, out there. But in your experience, what do you think they can move to, rather seamlessly?
Sure. To the extent I have seen people around me make transitions, so to speak, in their career, right? Banking is typically a sell-side sort of, career path, right? To your comment earlier, once people spend a few years, either in a product role or in a coverage role or in an analytically focused role, you could take those skills to the buy side, right? Buy side could be, private equity firms, asset managers, alternative finance providers, even in the recent years, a lot of opportunities have evolved in the fintech sort of startup space. A lot of fintechs are competing with the traditional banking organizations in providing alternative, more efficient, electronic channels for, raising finance, whether it's retail or wholesale, right? And disintermediation is happening in a big way. So there's just a plethora of opportunities for people to take their skills and really make them portable, right? So that's if you want to continue to be in the financial services space. The other opportunity, is a path that I have sort of stumbled upon is, to go to the other side of the table. All these years, in my first, call it 10 years of formative, growth in banking, I was negotiating, financing opportunities and structures with clients who were CFOs and treasurers and other sort of, funding and, cash management professionals with the client organizations I was covering. But I find myself here on the other side, the table's turned, right? So it's a full circle. This is a fantastic experience as well. Now you're singularly focused on your own organization, your capital structure. Every basis point of cost savings, really goes a long way towards, printing your improved bottom line and answering questions from investors. So a lot of people who develop the product knowledge and the experience of providing financing and crafting solutions for clients can take that experience to the other side, to the corporate side or to the institutional side, and to be able to manage the funding or capital or broader treasury responsibilities within the client side.
Fantastic. With that, we move on to the rapid fire round. So we would like to see the entire panel, and we have a few questions out here. Some of them just need one-word answers. Some of them would need you to give us a slightly longer answer. And I will just start with the first question. So the question is to the entire panel. When you joined banking, did you think you would be in banking all these years later? Nisha?
No, I didn't think it was interesting enough at that point, but it's getting more and more fun, yes.
Raj?
Absolutely, yes. I don't have two ways about it. Years ago, maybe I would have not been able to answer this, but I think 4 years into the career, I would have answered the same. Yes, absolutely, yes.
Fantastic. Shweta?
No, at the time when I started, I didn't have that visibility. But yes, few years down the line, I knew this is the career for me.
Amit?
When I joined wholesale banking, which is into the investment banking, that was my dream to get into the investment banking. So I never thought of anything beyond that. So that I thought was the thing that I would want to do forever, which is not the case, as you know now.
Kalyan?
Absolutely not.
Interesting. Next question is to Shweta. What do you enjoy the most about working in wholesale banking, and how about the least?
The most I would say is meeting people and the high of closing a deal. Least I would say banking is very process driven. So yes, mundane processes, which are very important, but yeah.
Sure. Amit, as the CEO, what is that one thing that keeps you up at night?
See, I think I said in my previous answer also earlier, having a dependable team is of extreme importance. So if any of the team member is there possibility of he leaving would keep me awake, because that's something which is most critical. Having a team comfortably committed with me, who is aligned, is very comforting, because that takes care of most of your worries.
Great. Kalyan, what is that one quality that you look for when you're hiring someone?
Well, obviously, when we go to a school to kind of recruit people, we go there because we know the quality of talent is there. So it's not about how intelligent the person is. I think within a very narrow band of 1 or 2 points of IQ, everyone on the campus is equally smart. What I've sort of relied on over the years is looking for people with the right attitude. Right, I could teach somebody a product or credit or some financial analysis that helps them with their banking jobs. I cannot teach somebody to bring the right attitude to work every day. That's what I look for.
Lovely. Nisha, a career in good old banking versus one in a fintech startup. What would be your advice to youngsters getting into their careers today?
Wherever you can move fast and break stuff, yes, in banks, if they would let you do, preferably look for high growth areas of the bank where there's more tolerance for trying new stuff. If not, then fintechs and startups, yes.
Raj, what is the most important quality, for being a trusted client advisor?
Yeah, three things. You've got to keep asking yourself three things. Whatever actions am I taking, are these in the interest of my clients? Number two, do they generate economic value? Do they add economic value to us and the client? And third is, are these systemically responsible? These are Citi's tenets. It's not mine, but this is what we've been taught from the day one I joined the bank. I think this is what gets you to be a trusted advisor, and the formula doesn't change over the years.
Interesting. Shweta, what's your take on this? What makes you an exceptional client trusted advisor?
I think I would agree with Raj what he just said because I think those are really the basics. Just I would like to add is, do your homework well, do your research fully, know your client well, and be absolutely transparent and honest. Even if you've made a mistake or you don't have a solution for the problem they're facing, just be honest and transparent. That goes a long way.
Fantastic. Um, Kalyan, what is the one thing that's common between banking in India and the US, and what's the one thing that's completely different?
My experience has been that wherever you do banking around the world, it's always the client first. So it's client centric. Everything starts with the client. So that's been the common theme I've noticed across. In terms of differences, right? One of the primary differences, at least that I have sort of learned about, maybe things are changing now, is in India, I think while capital markets, especially on the debt side and other structured finance markets are developing, there's heavy reliance on banking and balance sheet lending by the banks still as the majority sort of source of raising capital or funding for businesses. Whereas in a place like the US, there's an equal amount of alternative finance providers outside the traditional banking channels that you could rely on, and you could structure your way into a specific financing need. And that's changing and that's evolving in India as well. But a lot of it's got to do with the banking sector reforms and how they've sort of started opening up.
Sure. Nisha, how about London versus India?
So similarities, I would echo what Kalyan said. Clients come first, and that's the same everywhere. Difference is I'm still wrapping my head around negative interest rates, which I've no clue about from India. So that's I've still not got a full hold of it. So that's one. Second, I also notice clients are more willing to pay for services in Western Europe compared to India. But there, I would completely go with the Indian culture, which is also an Israeli one, which we also cover, where we somehow fix things and keep things working. And here, everything has to be perfect, otherwise it doesn't work.
Interesting. My next question is to all of you. If you were not a banker, what would you be? So let's just go around. Raj?
As Kalyan, I think, pointed out, he was taking a jibe at me. I did land up a job in Asian Paints, and I think I would have been there even now. So that comment was for me. I would have sold paints.
Interesting. Amit?
I would have been in consulting, but if I have to redo everything, probably I would have wanted to be a lawyer.
Wow. Shweta?
I think banking is my true passion, but if not banking, then maybe I would have been in HR.
Nice. Kalyan, how about you?
Well, I was actually giving him a compliment. To sell anything requires a lot of skill and charisma, right? Which he has plenty of. I think I would have been teaching something somewhere if I were not to be in banking.
I think Shweta is
Nisha?
logging back in. Yes. So for me, I would probably be a homeschooling mom with an app development business on the side.
All right. So we move on to the next question, which is a serious one. What would be your one last parting piece of advice to someone who wants to get into banking and be successful at it? Kalyan?
Well, I would say, don't be afraid to take a risk. Don't be afraid to jump into something you're not comfortable with, right? Be always eager to learn and be willing to bend your back backwards over. When people throw stuff at you, it doesn't matter what it is, how interesting it is or not on the day of. Do the best you can, because that's how you present yourself to the broader organization. That's how doors open. That's how opportunities come. And be patient, most importantly.
Fantastic. I think I couldn't have, thought of a better way to end our webinar today. It's been really inspiring, and it's been so great, I think, hearing your stories, and I'm sure our audience has enjoyed as much as I have. There is just so much to learn, I think, from all the experiences that we've all had as a group. And a lot of advice. I think if I were to just pick a few things, one is, of course, do whatever you're doing really well. Be patient, explore, learn, and don't be afraid. With that, we will sign off. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. Thanks a ton. Wish you all the very best for your endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all.